Okay, thank you. Thank you. I will share my screen. Do you hear me well?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And can you see now the slideshow? Do you see the slideshow?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Well, so I was I'm supposed to present some results of a preliminary experiment that we have been conducting here in Cordoba. Is part of our overall goals in this project, but I'm going to focus mostly on some uncertainties that we have been trying to estimate, model, and also discuss associated with the delineation of management zones in precision agriculture. Let's see, how can I? Okay. Well, we know that crop fields are spatially heterogeneous, and most of our modeling tools have been prepared and calibrated and used at point-based level. We are trying to upscale some of these tools. This becomes even more important in our conditions because we have several geomorphological properties that vary largely over an unique field. And in addition to that, we have also a rotation effect, which we can assume as a crop times year interaction. So the different combinations of different crops grown under different year conditions, plus the typical Mediterranean climate variability that affects here mostly important in under this project, not only rainfall intensity, but also rainfall distribution during a cropping year. And this leads to several processes that vary largely over space and time, leading to greater spatial heterogeneity of process determining crop performance under our conditions. We are working and talking mostly here about rainfall, rain-fed conditions, where we believe that rainfall distribution, not just in terms of precipitation, but also in terms of spatial distribution over the crop fields, will determine part of this crop heterogeneity. Well, in our conditions, we know that spatial and temporal heterogeneity brings uncertainty, and we believe that this uncertainty increases risks of taking ineffective decisions, of higher and expected yield gaps, risks of getting lower quality products, and risks of dealing with non-representative data, which in our case as researchers is quite important. What we have been doing here is we have been mapping in a macro catch commercial field of around 42 hectares. It's a typical arable land where we have annual crop rotations combining rain-fed cereal production with some extensive leguminous also production, and industrial crops such as canola and sunflower. We have been mapping most of these geomorphological properties. I'm talking about electrical conductivity at different depths, trying to define sampling schemes for mapping soil texture, soil organic carbon, nutrients availability, and also topographic properties. This is also has been also determining for our sampling schemes and sampling strategies, in which we have also combined sensing tools and integrating most at let's say office work, spatial and temporal processes with the support of statistics and modeling. And well, we know that the final outcome of all this, let's say, spatial assessment is always to try to correlate most of these properties and try to understand how they combine with the spatial crop yield. So I'm talking here mostly about crop yield mapping, and in this sense we have in our work package we have been exploring several possibilities. We have using combined harvest data, in this case using yield maps from combined harvesting machines, through geostatistics by spatially interpolating spatial sampling points, exploring different interpolation methods and different also sampling schemes, and also trying to develop some simulation trials in which we are trying to upscale the conceptually prepared models for point-based scales up to the scales we are interested to study. Here in this slide, you see some of the spatial heterogeneity that we can have about 1 month and a half after crop emergence. Two yield maps, 3D design. These are part of the outcomes of the tasks that we have been conducting. Well, what is the main problem here then? Well, the main problem is that we know that significant advances have been made in respect to precision agriculture. There's a lot of information, tools, concepts appearing right now. But as an agronomist, we identify that less attention has been devoted to access some possible explanatory mechanisms of these spatial variations. In this specific slideshow, I'm mostly addressing something that we call the temporal asymmetry associated with the variable crop year interactions. So the difficulties in correlating the spatial heterogeneity that vary from year to year, not just as a result of different crops in a rotation scheme, but also as a result of the spatial variation of the geomorphological properties that we have in our conditions, plus the typical variation in a Mediterranean climate. This is something that we can understand as a spatial dilemma, and which is something that I try to synthesize in this scheme. So I would like you to have some attention on this scheme, because I think it's quite a good synthesis of what I'm trying to address here with this presentation, and this is also part of what has been presented in the EGU conference, online conference. So basically, if we try to develop a precision farming system in our conditions, we may start with multiple year data, mostly here talking about historical data, in which we could combine a geomorphological mapping of geomorphological properties, but also, let's say, spatial data derived from historical satellite data and yield maps obtained from previous years combined harvesting. But then the main question here is, okay, we have multiple year data, but which data should we use? And do these data all have the same level of importance in addressing and in assessing these spatial variations? Well, we have been trying and exploring some statistical methods. We tried to use principal component analysis, also a boosted regression tree, in order to understand what is the level of importance of each of the possible exploratory properties in explaining our yield variations. From here we understand that there's multiple options of identifying levels of hierarchy in our historical data and select variables. When we select variables, we have to cluster them, because a precision farming is, if you see here in the left upper part of this slide, a precision farming system is basically a farming system where we have a site-specific crop management. But to have a site-specific crop management, we need first to identify management zones, which are basically zones in our field with different levels of response under a same management, or with, let's say, levels of response that under adjusted management, we can take the field up to let's say a more homogeneous state. Well, this is dependent on the spatial patterns clustering. So we first need to identify the spatial patterns and then to cluster them. But here there's something that is important to make a distinction, which is the distinction between a class and a zone. A class is basically a statistical group where we have, let's say, a uniform pattern in respect to some property or some group of properties. And the zone is a statistical group that is statistically based on a class, but that is also spatially organized. And this is important for a precision farming system because we don't want to work with management zones that are unfeasible or that are impractical. So here we explored something that brings our, let's say, main components, main data into classes, not into zones. And then I've been also trying to develop some spatial fragmentation algorithms in order to group those classes and transform them into something that is feasible to be managed in a farming system and in a farming system, in a typical farming system. But then the next question is that, well, we can group all these data, but then the spatial variation of crop performance, so let's say the yield maps, still need to be correlated with the delineated management zones. Otherwise, we are not here defining something that is agronomically meaningful, let's say. So this leads us into a cycle where we are continuously exploring not just the level of applicability and if these management zones are feasible, but also the correlation between the crop heterogeneity and the input data, let's say. These led us to identify that under our conditions we deal with lots of instability, something that we call the management zone's temporal instability. Here in this graph, you can see basically a time series of the goodness of variance fit of yield maps combined with our management zones. So basically, it measures how good our management zones are in grouping the different yield, let's say, classes that we can obtain from year to year. We see that there are some crops that may have more, let's say, a spatial stable response. In this case, mostly thinking about sunflower, with a shorter growth period. If we go and we start talking about autumn sown crops such as winter wheat, things start to get very unstable, and mostly here we believe that as a result of different years in terms of rainfall intensity and distribution. So basically, what are the take-home highlights here? The main take-home highlights here are that agronomic implications of site-specific management vary greatly with the crop year setting, both in our conditions, where we have considerable temporal instability of management zones, in part associated to the typical rotation schemes, but also in part associated to the variability of rainfall intensity and distribution that we have in our systems. From here, we know that site-specific management should not be conducted with persistent confidence in the absence of continuous evaluation and redelineation of these management zones. the spatial interpretation of results, in our case, has not been fully automated from the metrics proposed, which also leads us to think that digital agriculture is an important support, but we are still far from a fully autonomous system where we could blindly, let's say, trust on an algorithm. We also believe that spatial yield simulation is quite promising in order to overcome the lack of historical data that may lead us to lower levels of the goodness of variance fit in this type of approaches. So basically what we call the spatial dilemma. And we hypothesize that spatial water modeling is relevant to assess crop heterogeneity in rain-fed systems, which is basically let's say the main research question of our group throughout this project. Well, basically on the tasks that I'm personally participating, and this is being currently tested. I would like to thank you for your attention. I would like to say that this has been already presented as a conference short paper in EGWA General Assembly, and most of these algorithms, codes, and databases are becoming and are partly already available in GitHub. You can just send me an email and I will be happy to share with you all the links, but you may also find these links available in the link of the uncertainties associated with the delineation of management zones in precision agriculture presentation of EGWA General Assembly. So thank you all for your attention.